They laughed at her. 2 weeks later, the city's water was contaminated, and no one knew what to do. The warning had been given, in public, with witnesses. But that night, no one took it seriously. That night, Hannah Crowley stood in the center of the town hall of Bayou Ridge, Louisiana, holding a dead microphone. While dozens of people laughed, it wasn't nervous laughter, it wasn't discomfort, it was the confident laughter of people who believe that bad things don't happen to normal folks, in normal towns. Hannah didn't look dangerous. She didn't look like someone worth listening to. She was just a thin woman in plain clothes, with the deep shadows of someone who works too much and sleeps too little. Sitting beside her on a cold metal folding chair was her son Eli, 6 years old, swinging his short legs and gripping a small plastic toy car. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the mood. Children always do. "Mom," he whispered, "why are they laughing?" Hannah didn't answer. She was too focused on something no one else seemed to notice. The strange heat in the air. The heavy, sticky humidity. The kind of night that comes before storms too big to just be called rain. Minutes earlier, she had done something that took more courage than it looked like. She had raised her hand. In a room full of city officials, business leaders, and longtime residents, Hannah Crowley, widow, school custodian, and diner waitress, asked to speak. "I need you to inspect the Riverside Industrial Plant," she said. "The chemical facility by the river. The containment tanks are compromised. If a major storm hits, this will leak straight into the water." Some people exchanged glances. Others smiled. Mayor Calvin Rusk slowly looked up, wearing the practiced patience of a man who had already decided not to take her seriously. "Mrs. Crowley," he said, emphasizing her last name to create distance, "those facilities undergo regular state inspections." "Not the way they should," she replied. "The drainage pumps are failing. If the river rises too fast, the chemical storage tanks won't hold." Before the mayor could respond, a short laugh echoed from the right side of the room. Wade Harlan, plant manager at Riverside, the man responsible for the facility that processed and stored industrial chemicals used throughout the region's agriculture. Big man. Confident voice, easy smile, and the kind of person who had never been forced to prove he knew what he was doing. "You work there now?" he asked, leaning forward. "Because last I checked, you clean the floors at the school." The laughter spread. Hannah felt her face heat up, not from embarrassment, from urgency. "My husband worked there," she said. "He handled maintenance on the containment systems. He explained to me what happens when water pressure exceeds the limit." Wade's smile didn't fade. "Your husband died there," he replied, "with all due respect." The silence lasted less than a second. Then the laughter returned, louder. The mayor raised a hand, pretending to restore order. "Let's keep this respectful," he said, without looking at Hannah. "Mrs. Crowley, spreading fear doesn't help anyone." "This isn't fear," she insisted. "It's physics. Excess water. Industrial waste. Containment failure. If it rains the way the forecast says, contamination isn't a possibility. It's inevitable." She reached into her bag and pulled out folded papers. Weather forecasts. Old facility schematics. Handwritten notes copied from her husband's notebooks. No one stood up to look. "It always rains here," someone muttered from the back. "And nothing ever happens," another replied. Wade crossed his arms, amused. "Are you all seeing this?" he said, scanning the room. A traumatized widow spinning theories because she can't accept what happened. This isn't engineering. It's drama. The laughter was unanimous. Hannah looked around. She saw people too comfortable to imagine disaster. Adults who would rather laugh than admit they might be wrong. An entire system protecting itself with mockery. Then she heard the quiet voice beside her again. "Mom, please." She closed her eyes for a moment. The mayor cleared his throat. "Mrs. Crowley, we need to move on with the agenda." She understood. It didn't matter what she said. It didn't matter what she showed. She had no title, no authority, no living husband to validate her voice. She lifted Eli into her arms, feeling the small warmth of his body, and the heavier weight of a certainty no one in that room wanted to carry. As she left the hall, someone muttered just loud enough to be heard. "Some people are always waiting for the end of the world." Outside, the air felt even heavier. Hannah buckled Eli into the car seat, closed the door carefully, and then stayed there, hands resting on the steering wheel. She thought about her husband, about the nights he came home exhausted, talking about valves, tanks, pressure, and unlikely failures. She remembered a sentence he repeated often, never as drama, always as warning. "It's not the collapse that kills people, it's the delay." If they weren't going to act, she would. Alone, if she had to. Because when the rain came, when the water changed color, when children started getting sick, she knew exactly who would pay the price first. And it wouldn't be the men who were laughing. Before she became the woman everyone laughed at during that meeting, Hannah Crowley had always been someone who listened. She never planned to learn anything about industrial plants, containment valves, or systems that were never supposed to fail. She just loved someone who talked about those things every day. Her husband, Michael Crowley, wasn't a chief engineer, and he never appeared in ribbon-cutting photos. He never signed important reports. He was a maintenance operator, the kind of man who knew a place not by its offices, but by its sounds, who could tell something was wrong not because an alarm went off, but because the noise changed. Michael used to say that machines talk, and that most people don't know how to listen. At night, after Eli was asleep, Hannah would sit at the kitchen table while Michael flipped through thick notebooks filled with handwritten notes, crooked diagrams, arrows, warnings underlined more than once. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough to know when he was worried. "This shouldn't be like this," he would say sometimes, pointing at a sketch. "If the pump fails during a heavy storm, no one will notice until it's too late." "Don't they check that?" Hannah asked once. Michael shrugged. "They check what's required, not what's likely." He never sounded paranoid. He sounded tired. Tired of warning supervisors who responded with rehearsed phrases. Tired of hearing, "That's never happened before." Tired of working in a place where efficiency always beat prevention. On the last night they spent together, before the accident, Michael left one of the notebooks on the table. "If something ever goes wrong out there," he said, "don't wait for anyone to warn you. Watch the river. Watch the rain. Pay attention to the smell of the water." Hannah laughed, thinking he was exaggerating. 3 weeks later, Michael died when a faulty valve failed during an emergency maintenance operation, and the investigation concluded it was human error. The notebook was never mentioned. After the funeral, Hannah put everything into a box. Not out of technical interest, out of grief. For months, she didn't open those notebooks. She just worked. She took care of Eli. She moved forward. Until the day something changed. She noticed that the river near the school where she cleaned floors was higher than normal for that time of year. Not flooding, just rising. Slowly. Quietly. She also noticed that the smell of the water had changed. Nothing strong, nothing obvious, just different. That night, after Eli fell asleep, Hannah opened the box. She flipped through the notebooks, slowly, reading them with new eyes. There were the same terms she had spoken at the town hall meeting: drainage pumps, containment points, critical water levels during tropical storms. And there was one line, underlined 3 times in firm handwriting: cascade failure. One small thing pulls everything else with it. That was when Hannah started paying attention. Not like someone expecting disaster, but like someone who refused to be caught off guard. She began checking the weather every day. Not the casual forecast, the pressure maps, rain accumulation models, storm paths forming in the Gulf. She watched how water behaved near the riverbanks, which areas flooded first, which ones drained last. She noticed that every time heavy rain hit, riverside plant trucks appeared late at night. Always after midnight, always unmarked, always on nights when the river rose fastest. And every single time, a small notice appeared on the city's website the next day. Boil water advisory. People complained for a few days. Then they forgot. Hannah didn't forget. She remembered what Michael had said. Never trust systems that apologize after the damage is done. That's when she started preparing. Not dramatically. Not like someone waiting for the end of the world, but like a mother. She began buying water jugs, 2 at a time, whenever she could afford it. Never all at once. Never enough to draw attention. She installed a basic sink filter, then a better one when she could. She learned how to read county emergency bulletins, not to panic, but to understand response times. She marked official shelters on a map, then crossed several off when she realized they sat too low to stay dry. She taught Eli, playfully, how to recognize strange smells in water, never to drink without asking, never to enter the river after heavy rain. It's like being a detective, she told him. Eli loved the idea of being a detective. Meanwhile, the town stayed comfortable. The mayor attended events. The plant manager gave calm interviews. People made plans for summer. Hannah saw something else. Storms forming earlier, hotter, heavier. Warnings issued, then quietly withdrawn, as if no one wanted to be the first to sound the alarm. That's when she decided to speak. Not because she expected to convince anyone, but because if something happened, she needed to know she had tried. That night at the meeting, when she was mocked, when she was called dramatic, when laughter replaced questions, something shifted inside her. Not anger, clarity. When she understood that if things went wrong, there would be no time to explain. No space for, "I told you so." There would only be consequences. And that week, the weather maps began showing something she recognized too well. A mass of warm air rising too fast from the Gulf. Pressure dropping. Rain totals projected far above normal. An unnamed storm. For now. Hannah printed the maps, packed her husband's notebooks into a waterproof bag, reviewed everything she had prepared. She didn't tell anyone, because she already knew how this story went. She didn't need them to believe her. She just needed that when everything else failed. She wouldn't. The rain started on a Tuesday night. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that triggered alarms. Just warm, steady rain. The kind that falls patiently, like it has nowhere else to be. Hannah noticed before anyone else. Not because someone warned her, but because the river responded differently. The next morning, when she arrived at the school, the water was closer to the bank than it had been the day before. Still within its channel. Still normal. But the movement was wrong. It wasn't flowing. It was pressing. Like it was too full to keep obeying. At 10:17 a.m., the first notice appeared on the city's website. Boil water advisory. Precautionary measure. Nothing else. No explanation, no timeline, just one short sentence, buried between community announcements and local events. At the cafeteria where Hannah worked that afternoon, people talked about it the way they talked about the weather. "Again?" someone complained. "They always overreact," another said. "Just boil the water," a woman laughed. Hannah wiped the counter in silence. She wasn't using that water anymore. At 2 p.m., the river passed the line Michael had drawn years earlier in his notebook. Hannah stood by the school window a few seconds longer than usual. A teacher walked by and joked, "Becoming a meteorologist now, Hannah?" She smiled, out of politeness. Inside, her stomach tightened. That night, the rain got heavier. Not violent bursts, no thunder, just uninterrupted, like the sky had decided not to stop. Around 3 in the morning, Hannah woke up to a smell. It was faint, almost imaginary, but it was there. She got up quietly so she wouldn't wake Eli and went to the sink. She turned the faucet. The water came out slightly cloudy, not brown, not green, just dull. Hannah shut it off immediately. No hesitation. She reached into the cabinet and pulled out a jug. And then another. Clean water. Set aside days earlier. By morning, Bayou Ridge felt different. Some people complained of headaches. Others mentioned mild nausea. 2 children stayed home from school after vomiting overnight. Nothing alarming on its own. But together, the pieces formed a pattern Hannah recognized too well. At 9 a.m., a second notice appeared. Boil water advisory remains in effect. Still no mention of Riverside, still no mention of chemical contamination. At 11, the mayor went on the local radio station. "There's no reason to panic," he said. "We're simply taking precautions." At 1 in the afternoon, the first Riverside trucks rolled through town. Unmarked, no sirens, always after heavy rain, always at the same time. Hannah counted 3. By 5 p.m., the notice changed tone to avoid consuming unfiltered water. At 6, the grocery store started to feel off. The water shelves didn't empty all at once. They thinned. People grabbed 2 jugs, then came back for 2 more. No one ran. No one argued. Not yet. That night, a message appeared in a local group chat. "Anyone else think the water tastes weird?" The replies came fast. "It's always been like that." "You're overthinking it." "It's just chlorine." Hannah didn't reply. She went home, closed the curtains, and did something simple. She turned on the system she had built slowly, quietly, in layers. Eli bathed in clean water. "Why?" he asked. "Just to be safe," she said. By morning, the rain had stopped. But what it had carried into the city hadn't. On the 3rd day, the notice changed again. Water unsafe for consumption until further notice. Schools closed. And the cafeteria closed. The hospital began rationing. And then came the question no one wanted to ask. How long will this last? No one answered. The emergency water trucks were delayed. Then they didn't come. Bayou Ridge wasn't evacuated. There were no sirens. It was worse than that. The town was left waiting. By the 4th day, grocery stores were empty. By the 5th, people started knocking on doors. And by the 6th, something became impossible to ignore. Hannah Crowley's house looked the same. No panic. No empty bottles in the trash. No sick child. People noticed. And someone finally remembered what she had said in that meeting. Not out loud. Not publicly. In whispers. That woman. The one from Riverside. The widow. Late that afternoon, Hannah heard a knock at her gate. She already knew. She opened the door. On the other side stood a neighbor she'd barely exchanged greetings with before. holding an empty water jug. "I heard that you—" the woman began, then stopped. Hannah looked at the jug, then at her face, and stepped aside. "Come in." Because now it wasn't about warnings anymore. It was about survival. And the collapse wasn't finished yet. The first person entered Hannah's house without asking for explanations. She didn't ask how. She didn't ask why. Questions are a luxury when options are gone. The woman held the empty water jug with both hands, as if afraid someone might take it from her. Hannah didn't give a speech. She didn't explain. She simply opened the door and let her in. The water she handed over didn't taste strange. It didn't smell. It didn't carry that dull cloudiness people had begun to recognize. It was just water. And the woman took one careful sip, then another, faster, and then she cried. "My son hasn't stopped vomiting since yesterday," she said. "The doctor told us to boil the water, but it's not helping anymore." Hannah nodded. She already knew. This wasn't something boiling could fix. Not when the contamination came mixed with industrial residue washed in by the storm. She didn't say that out loud. She only said, "Bring more jugs tomorrow." By the next morning, there were 3 people at the gate. By afternoon, 6. On the 3rd day, Hannah had to set a schedule. Not because she wanted control, but because she needed to protect Eli. She set up a simple table in the backyard. On it, buckets, improvised filters, layers of sand, charcoal, thick cloth, containers marked with a pen. Nothing looked advanced, but everything was there for a reason. She didn't explain the entire system. She explained only what mattered. This water needs time to settle. You can't skip this step. If you skip it, it won't work. People obeyed. Not because they trusted her, but because there was no one else left to trust. On the 4th day, someone Hannah recognized showed up. Wade Harlan. No smile. No confident voice. No audience. He didn't bring an empty jug. He brought questions. "You can't distribute water without authorization," he said, trying to sound firm. Hannah kept working. "The entire town is under an emergency advisory," he continued. "This needs to go through official channels." She finally looked up. "Which channels?" she asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because the official channels had nothing now. Behind him, people were waiting. Not laughing, not whispering, waiting. "Oh, where did you learn this?" Wade asked more quietly. "Who taught you?" Hannah pointed to the buckets. "By watching," she said, "and by listening to people you never listened to." He swallowed. "The plant hasn't confirmed any failure," he said. "Not yet." "I know," Hannah replied. "Failures are rarely announced before they hurt someone." On the 6th day, the city tried to organize an official distribution point. It failed. The water brought in from outside ran out in hours. Arguments broke out. People shouted. That same day, someone taped a handwritten sign to a utility pole. "Clean water, Hannah's house." She hadn't approved it, but she didn't take it down. That night, Hannah sat on the kitchen floor with Eli. "Mom," he asked softly, "are they still laughing?" She thought for a moment. "No," she said. "Now they're scared." On the 7th day, the contamination was officially confirmed. Chemical runoff from the Riverside plant had entered the river during the storm. The statement called it an unforeseen event. Hannah read the word and let out a quiet, humorless breath. Unforeseen. She locked her phone. Outside, people waited in silence. And for the first time since the town hall meeting, no one doubted her. But the worst was still ahead. Because water was only the beginning. And the town still hadn't realized how completely it now depended on the woman they had once laughed at. The town lasted less time without food than anyone expected. Water is survival, but food is stability. And stability was the first thing to disappear. On the 8th day after the storm, the grocery store opened for less than 20 minutes, and there was no official announcement, no warning. The doors simply unlocked. The shelves were already half empty when the first people rushed inside. Rice, canned goods, anything that could last more than a day. In under 30 minutes, there was nothing left. There were no open fights. But there were hidden shoves, hard looks, people clutching grocery bags like shields. By afternoon, rumors spread that supply trucks couldn't get through, that the southern highway was flooded. That priority was being given to the capital. That night, the truth appeared in a single sentence on the county website. Food distribution suspended until further notice. That was when fear changed shape. Until then, people had been worried. Now, they were scared. The next morning, children stopped showing up to the makeshift classes the town was trying to keep running. Not because of illness, because of hunger. The elderly felt it first, then the sick, then everyone else. Hannah watched quietly, not with coldness, with calculation. She knew food wasn't something you improvised overnight, but she also knew the town's greatest weakness had always been the same. They trusted someone else would fix it. That morning, a woman showed up at her gate without a water jug. She was holding an empty plastic bag. "Do you have anything to eat?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Hannah took a breath. "Not much," she said, "but enough." She didn't open her pantry. She led the woman to the back of the yard. There, where there had once been nothing but packed dirt, was something most people had never noticed. Garden beds. Small, so organized, shielded by simple tarps and makeshift wooden frames. Nothing pretty, nothing impressive, but alive. "That wasn't here before," the woman said. "It was," Hannah replied. "It just didn't draw attention." She had started weeks earlier, not after the meeting, before it, using what little she knew, testing the soil, avoiding low ground, building simple barriers to protect against contaminated runoff, planting fast-cycle crops, food that grows quickly when it isn't interrupted. She hadn't told anyone, because she knew exactly what would happen if she did. "Can this feed everyone?" the woman asked, hope rising too fast. Hannah shook her head. "No, but it can keep some people from going hungry." The news spread, not as an announcement, as a necessity. That same day, people started coming not just for water, but for guidance. "Where can we plant? What still grows? How do we know if the soil is safe?" Hannah didn't give speeches. She gave instructions. "Not here. Maybe there. This soil won't work. That one might, if you isolate it." She taught without raising her voice. And without realizing it, the town began to move around her. Not around the mayor, not around the plant, not around official statements, around her. That afternoon, Mayor Calvin Rusk showed up. No microphone, no entourage. He stood by the gate for several seconds before speaking. "The town needs structure," he said. "We need centralized decisions." Hannah wiped her hands on her jeans. "The town is already organizing," she said. "Just not the way you expected." He looked around, saw people working, saw children carrying buckets, and saw residents he recognized following instructions from someone he had ignored. "This can't continue," he said. "You weren't elected for this." Hannah looked straight at him. "And you were elected to ignore warnings?" He didn't answer, because for the first time, his authority weighed nothing. That night, while the rest of the town tried to sleep on empty stomachs, Hannah sat with Eli beside the garden beds. "Mom," he said. Now they're asking for help. She brushed his hair back. Not everyone who asks learns, she said, but the ones who learn survive. And in that moment, it became clear. The town was no longer facing a temporary crisis. It was being forced to change. And the woman they had laughed at in that meeting was now the only reason Bayou Ridge was still standing. The collapse didn't arrive with sirens, and it arrived with silence. On the morning of the 11th day, there was no new update on the county website, no statement, no vague promise. The site simply went offline. Phones at City Hall rang, and no one answered. At the Riverside plant, the gates stayed closed. No workers went in, no trucks came out. And for the first time since the crisis began, no one showed up to explain anything. That was when the town realized something it had never considered possible. There was no one in control anymore. No clean water, not enough food, no functioning authority. And when authority disappears, only one thing remains: choice. People started arguing, first in small groups, then louder, then with anger. Gee, this can't go on. She doesn't run this town. It's not fair that some have more than others. Hannah's name started circulating again, but this time with a different tone. Not as a joke, not as curiosity, as a problem. That afternoon, a group showed up at her gate. They weren't asking. They were demanding. "We know you're holding back food," said a man she recognized from the town meeting. "This needs to be distributed properly." Hannah didn't raise her voice. "It is being distributed," she said, "to people willing to work." "And what about those who can't?" another woman snapped. "The elderly, the sick, the children?" "They come first," Hannah replied. "They always have." The man crossed his arms. "So you decide who gets to live better?" The question hung heavy. Hannah didn't look away. "No, and I decide who learns how to survive." That sparked something dangerous. Not hatred, resentment. People who had never learned to rely on themselves now being forced to, and hating every second of it. "You don't have authority," someone shouted. "I have responsibility," Hannah answered. The argument was about to turn into something worse when a siren sounded in the distance. Not from City Hall, from the school. An improvised alarm. Children were getting sick. Boiled water wasn't enough anymore. The makeshift filters couldn't keep up. The problem Hannah had warned about was spreading. Not as an explosion, but as seepage. Slow, quiet, deadly. That night, the town had to face the full truth. Without Hannah, there was no backup plan. And without a backup plan, only two options remained: work together or fight until nothing was left. Mayor Calvin Rusk finally reappeared, this time without speeches. He walked straight up to Hannah. "If this turns violent," he said, "we won't be able to control it." Hannah looked around, saw exhausted faces, hungry eyes, people running on fear. "Then don't control it," she said. "Organize it." "How?" he asked, lost. Hannah took a breath. "The way it should have been done from the beginning." She proposed something no one wanted to hear. Distribution based on contribution. Collective work. Mandatory learning. If you wanted clean water, you learned to filter it. If you wanted food, you helped grow it. If you wanted protection, you helped build it. No exceptions. "That's not democracy," someone complained. "That's survival," Hannah replied. The silence that followed wasn't agreement. It was recognition. People understood this wasn't comfortable, or fair, or kind. It was real. And slowly, something shifted. Not everyone, never everyone, but enough. The next morning, Hannah's gate was no longer a point of conflict. It became a place of coordination. Tools appeared. Hands joined in. People started learning. Not because they trusted her, but because they finally understood there was no one else. And in the middle of that forced transformation, one thing became clear. The town that existed before was already gone. And the one taking shape now didn't revolve around titles, promises, or systems. It revolved around the person who saw the problem first and had the courage to act when everyone laughed. The town never returned to what it had been before. Not officially, not on paper, but in the way people looked at each other afterward. The weeks that followed were not easy. Nothing was fixed overnight. It took months before the water was considered safe again. Even longer for the soil. The riverside plant never reopened. Investigations dragged on. Reports were released. Names were mentioned, carefully enough that no one truly important paid the price. But the town had learned something no report could erase. When systems fail, titles don't save people. Decisions do. Hannah never took a position, never gave speeches, never became an official symbol of anything. She kept cleaning the school, kept working at the cafeteria. But now, when she spoke, people listened. The mayor never apologized in public. Wade Harlan never admitted he was wrong. But both of them began consulting Hannah before making any decision about water, soil, or safety. Not out of humility, out of necessity. The garden in her yard expanded. Others appeared across town. The improvised filters were refined, copied, and taught. Children learned skills no one had ever thought to teach them before. Eli grew up watching something rare. Adults learning. One afternoon, months later, as they walked near the river, lower now, clearer, he tugged at his mother's hand. "Mom, they don't laugh anymore, do they?" Hannah watched the water for a moment before answering. "No," she said. "Now they pay attention." She never spoke of revenge, never said, "I told you so." Because the truth was, Hannah never wanted to be right. She just couldn't afford to be wrong. The town moved forward, more cautious, slower, less confident. And for the first time, that was a good thing. Because there is always someone who sees it first. Someone who notices the problem when it still looks like exaggeration. Someone who speaks and becomes a joke. Until the day no one laughs anymore. Because when reality arrives, it doesn't ask for permission. It collects. And most of the time, the one who laughs last was never laughing in the beginning.